Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. With all the focus in Ukraine, people have forgotten China, the biggest threat, which is in this part of the world. And as a matter of fact, the entire world today. Everybody is focused on Russia, but there are moves that the Chinese are making that we need to look at. To discuss these moves and much more, I have with me Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, an eagle eye as far as China is concerned. I've read many of his articles, and the second time that he's on Dev Talks. Thank you, sir, for joining me. Some developments that we need to discuss.
Thank you, Aadi, for inviting me and a very interesting subject.
Sir, the Chinese President Xi Jinping recently signed a decree sort of a thing which approved non-war military actions abroad. And that to a lot of people has raised an eyebrow as to what is his intention behind this entire thing. At the precipice, how do you analyze a decree like this? Because the Chinese don't really, announce these kind of things.
Okay, thank you, Adi. And it's a very sharp question because, we have to now decipher as to what's happening in all these affairs. So when President Xi became president in 2012, in 2013, the Science of Military Strategy was a document issued in 2013 that first spoke about this, what you are calling about non-war military activities concept. In the West and even in India, we call it something like military operations other than war. This is a standing concept. We also have it. The West also has MOOTW. Now, this non-war military activities has been spoken of from 2013 onwards till date. What he has come out now is, he says, under the non-war military activities, there is something called special military operations. A special military operation gets your hackles raised because it brings you back to Russian, war with Ukraine, in which they said special military operations. So when we study the last 7-8 years of the movement on this issue, he had divided the non-war military into 4 larger parts. There was one which he said that they can be confrontation. This is largely in Xi's tenures. I'm talking last 10 years tenures. So one was actually confrontation, which said confrontation in maritime affairs, on anti-piracy, on counter-terrorism. So he had made some kind of a confrontation as part of non-militaries. There was also law enforcement, internal issues here, blockades, maritime security, some peacekeeping. So that was, he said, law enforcement. Then there were 2 benign little things under this one. One was called aid and rescue, what we say, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief type operations, like they did in Nepal. And of course, there were some cooperative activities. So when they started talking that paper and subsequent discussions, they are divided into 2 more military-like and 2 benign issues of the 4 that they brought about. Now, if we say what has he done now, he has brought, he has thought that he has reached a level. Now, the Chinese have reached a level. They have now, you have heard about Solomon Islands. They're making a base there. Recently, the Cambodia has come out, a military base there. They already had one in Djibouti. They have 100-odd harbors, which they are building worldwide. Many of them, they have taken long lease. It's not Hanbantota alone. There is one in Greece. There is many other places that he has harbors, which have been built by his corporations. And those are all, in which he has a lien. So now Chinese have a worldwide presence. I won't say the presence is like what they have, the Americans have in Philippines and in Japan and all the places. But he has a presence now. Does he imply that if something goes wrong in any one of these places, he will undertake special military operations? And I bring you here to Balochistan, where every odd day, the Chinese get sorted out, 4 or 5 people getting killed. Now, is he telling us that I will take special military operations, say, in Sudan, where he is taking the oil out? If something goes wrong there, I will employ my military to do that task. Now, there is a global or super power type of vision he's trying to state. Now, all this is, we'll have to decipher in times to come. But there is a semblance here. I want to separate out the special military operations of the Russians with him. Why did Russians talk about special military operations? Because Russians, when they talk war, in war, Russia means that you have to, all the reservists have to mobilize and join. When they say special military operations, they didn't call the reservists. So the country did not get mobilized. War means country mobilization. In case of Russia, he called it special military operations so that the reservists didn't join in. And Russians felt loss of manpower because they did not have the reservists. Because about 2 lakh reservists would have joined in. The deficiency that they had manpower into units would have been sorted out. But they didn't do so. So they called it special military operations because of the internal issues in Russia. What does President Xi mean by special military operations? He means something different. And I would say that he is giving an implication now that I will be wanting to operate anywhere in the world where my interests, which is Chinese interests, get threatened. So there is now a militarization of the Chinese BRI assets and whatever they are doing worldwide. They are saying if my assets get threatened, I will have the powers to now do special military operations outside anywhere in the world. Very serious connotations if I take it this way. So I think Taiwan, as everybody is saying Taiwan is equal to Ukraine, I mean, they're not is equal to. And this is a 6-chapter document. This is a large document. It is yet to be brought out in the open forum and translated. This the new one which has come out. And all refers to national sovereignty. In his case, sovereignty has got a wide ambit of thought process. So I'll say that Taiwan apart, which we can debate here, but it is an implication is more global. And maybe he's also seeking more bases. Suddenly he came out with Solomon Islands. Nobody had heard of it. Suddenly Cambodia has come out, and there will be many other things coming out in some time where he will be showing that there will be military presence for non-military activities, which we call it military operations other than war. That's a larger thing which I feel.
It's interesting that you mentioned Balochistan, sir, because just about a day or two ago, there was a report that the Chinese have told the Pakistanis that they will have a private military organization kind of taking care of their assets within Balochistan. And this military organization would be run by the MSS. It kind of joins the dot when you actually put it across in this particular way, sir. That's interesting. So the recent talks, we had a phone conversation between President Putin and President Xi some time back. And if you read both the readouts, there's one thing which is common in both of them is that talks about supporting each other's core interests. And especially in the Chinese version of it, it talks about, the Chinese observing the fact that Ukraine is a core interest to Russia. Now, is this something like a quid pro quo that they're looking for from Russia in talks of Taiwan, if as per say, sir?
So, see, if we read entirely in what happened in the course of last 3-4 months, on 4th of February, President Xi and President Putin, when he was visiting for the Olympics, they signed a 5,000-page document. Yeah. And they said it meant lasting peace. Lasting relationships or something. Those words were used in between the President Xi and it was path-breaking document. Sorry?
No limits, sir. No limits.
Yeah. No limits. Yes. No limits. Now, look at this one. They signed they talk no limits with Pakistanis, Chinese, deeper than the oceans and the higher than the mountains relationship. So, they have now come to no limits with. However, when you read into what the Chinese response was there for Ukraine, in the international fora, of course, they supported the Russians quite a bit. They have benefited by taking concessional oil from Russia. There was some kind of a currency trade based on yuan and ruble, all been spoken about. But have the Chinese come out in total support of the Russians on Ukraine? Look, I think time has come to understand that the Chinese have a bottom line, which is economics and trade and manufacturing. They don't want to lose the power that they have on manufacturing. They know that the Russians have been hit so hard by these sanctions. 55,000 sanctions. Sorry, 5,500 types of sanctions. No other nation, even Iran has 3,000 types of sanctions. Russians have been hit so hard. The Chinese do not want an iota of a chance where any sanction can hurt them. And we know that sanctions cannot hurt Chinese because they are the largest manufacturing hub, the second largest economy. They have global interests on it, can't do it. But the threat exists. So while the support to Russia is there on geopolitical issues and on international fora, I do not foresee the Chinese support wholeheartedly for the Russians. So there is a step that they have taken, but it's not whole hog. It is a very nuanced position when the Chinese have taken vis-a-vis Ukraine war. And in Ukraine itself, Chinese had tremendous interest. They were nearly buying that corporation called Motor Siege. They were making a wheat granary terminal at Mariupol, which is now stand destroyed. They were making 2 harbors next to Odisha. They were making a railway line inside Ukraine. So Chinese interests in Ukraine are also as much as they have interest in Russia. So, they have to take a balanced position. Tomorrow, they have to go back into Ukraine and re-energize the assets and the work that they were doing there. So that is one. To ask the second question that you said about whether the Russians will come out in support of the Chinese in case they launch an offensive, if and when they launch an offensive against Taiwan, I have my doubt whether the Russians will do so, or whether the Chinese will invite a thing like that, because Russians also are prudent people. If a war takes place, and if the Okinawa Island assets of the Americans get involved into this, the Taiwan Relations Act, if the Philippines-based assets get involved into the American assets based into Philippines get involved into the war with Taiwan in support of Taiwan, then that's an enlargement of war to no end. This has to be very carefully planned. And invariably, if the Americans see, President Biden said that we will, yes, the answer to a question is, yes, I will come in support. Later on, there were clarifications that we believe in strategic ambiguity, that yes was qualified or whatever. But, if the Americans have to have a standing here, they have to come to support of the Taiwanese if and when the war takes place, which my view is it's not imminent. It is some time away. But if it just happened, then the Russians will be prudently watching and not wanting to get involved into a war that may have global repercussions.
That's interesting. Basically, Russia will play the China card when the tables kind of turn the other way around.
Quid pro quo.
Sir. But having said that, sir, India finds itself in a very precarious situation with these two guys kind of coming close, because, earlier it was Russia, China, India, a lot of talks were there. But since the India-China relations kind of went sour, there is a bit of a reservation with regards to Indian and Russian relations and the Russian-Chinese relations. So it's a nasty triangle. Having said that, the dialogue is always that the relations are independent of each other. We know what happened in the S-400 case. We know there were multiple other stories that came out, sir. How do you assess this triangle going forward, and this particular thing affecting India-Russia, sir?
So there are many associations that we have in which, we are tied up with the Russians and the Chinese. BRICS is one of them. There is, as you know, RIC is a great forum, which in the 3 countries to tie up and discuss for quite some time. RIC is on, and summit meetings take place. There is also called SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So all 3 organizations, there are no Western countries there, but then there is involvement across with Russians and Chinese, and it has been on. And we were all this while thinking that that's providing us strength in discussions with the Chinese. As you rightly pointed out, 2 years ago, what has happened on the eastern Ladakh frontier, our relations with Chinese are soured, and they have not looked up. Trade having gone up to $125 billion is a separate issue altogether. But having said that, the relations have not moved upwards towards some kind of looking up. We have also now joined the economic association with the in Japan. We recently signed with the Americans. We have a quad which is moving upwards. There is a major exercise on shortly near Hawaii Islands, which we are wanting to participate. So, our links across on the Western world are also great, and they are growing. So we are in that position of a geopolitical decision making to find out where exactly and how we should proceed further. We ought to maintain our relations with Russia. Russia has been a strong friend of ours, and we understand Russia's, at least the military equipment will last us for another half a century, if not more. So we ought to be with Russians. We have taken great advantage in the oil and gas, oil that we're getting across from Russia, but we are also not dependent on the West. So we are at a cusp, a decision-making cusp. And the whole world is in a decision-making cusp. The geopolitics is shifting so fast that everybody is trying to decipher what position to take. I think having joined up with this economic grouping recently and not accepted to join the RCEP, which some of our friends had joined, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, they had joined RCEP. We did not join for different reasons, but we did not hesitate to join the economic groupings, which is brought through by the Americans. We are showing a little more leanings, which are becoming evident here. And this comes up because of the belligerence and the revanchist policies and the expansionism, which has been shown by the Chinese over many years, large number of years, especially last 2 years, and as they're developing. So while RIC exists, and we must exist and we must talk, but we are also conscious of the fact that there is a belligerent neighbor, and that belligerent neighbor stands firm, not wanting to start discussing the issues further on the border issues. So they want to say, the last visit of Wang Yi, he said, okay, we can discuss other issues. This they have been saying for the last 2 decades, that we can discuss other issues, but let's leave the borders for next generation. How many generations will leave the border issues to be discussed? So we understand that there is a belligerence here, and we need to be conscious of that fact.
Indeed, sir. I don't think there's any questions about that. I'd like to bring your attention to the news that came out about the third aircraft carrier. There is a lot of talk about the efficacy of the second carrier itself, and now they talk about the third one. That apart from the Shanghai security dialogue that took place, Shangri-La dialogue that took place, the Chinese defense minister was pretty aggressive in terms of his rhetoric with regards to Taiwan, and a lot of analysts have actually equated to the gaffe, or the intentional gaffe, if I may put it that way, is that Biden gave, and this was supposed to be a response to that. Would you agree to something like this, and how do you analyze these developments, sir?
So I think the basic thought process in the minds of the Chinese today is the 20th Party Congress. It's once in a 5 years affair. October. It's a very critical time for President Xi. He has amended the constitution. He wants to break away from a law passed in 1991, that a president will have only 2 tenures, 10 years. He wants to become next 5 years. The belligerence that he has to show on Taiwan issues also stems from him convincing these 2,500 to 3,000 delegates that come there for the party conference, look, I mean business here, and I am saying so. So this anguish that comes up, it will continue till November, when they're going to anoint him again as General Secretary and Chairman of CMC for the next 5 years. He's not he's not Chairman Mao as yet, but there may be a desire to become a Chairman Mao here and after. So the anguish that comes up in this time here, that's why you say, he says he doesn't, like you rightly pointed out, he says he doesn't recognize the median line. In Taiwanese Strait, there was a median line. He says the entire Taiwanese Straits is mine. And, Chinese have made inroads into many of these Taiwanese islands. Taiwan main itself, but not like the island of Kinmen. It's only, I think, 5-7 kilometers offshore of China. And the Chinese proximate cities are more trade with Kinmen. Kinmen is like trading every day with Chinese only. Tourists come, people go and do every day. And there is an island in South China Sea called Pratas, which is also a very major issue which Chinese are interested in. So there is, people say that it's available for the taking, but Taiwan is not Taiwan is not Ukraine. You know why? Because there are parallels here. Qing dynasty had Taiwan with them earlier, in a century ago. In 1895, I think the Japanese took over Taiwan and separated out. And then, so there is a history, but historically, Taiwan has been with China. Historically, Ukraine has been with Russia. So they were saying the population is similar. Ukraine has similar population as the Russian East Slavic people. The similar population and population exists in Taiwan also and exists in Chinese mainland also. There are parallels, but there are differentiations. There is an open border there. There are grasslands to move across between Russia and China. Here, there is an ocean. An ocean requires a flotilla to firstly assemble on one side, Normandy, and then sail across to the other side. Even if you use merchant shipping, you use fishing vessel, you still have to make a flotilla to move across 130 kilometers nautical miles, 130 nautical miles to go across to Taiwan and start capturing it. And Taiwan has got a very peculiar geography. There is an entire rib, is a huge ridgeline, massive ridgeline that splits the nation. It's a different kind of, and the Taiwanese has planned for this war. So to say, it's ready for plucking it away and eating it. It's not so simple. Even if the Americans have a strategic ambiguity in their thought process, it's not going to be simple. And this year, the Chinese cannot afford to first have the casualties and a problem in case they are not able to succeed. If it becomes a prolonged battle like what's happened across in Ukraine, the Chinese will have big trouble in the 20th Party Conference and thereafter. So, things have to pass away to the next 5 years in a form that, okay, the thought process that it is one country exists, but, we are not getting involved into fighting it today because something goes wrong, I lose my chair type stuff. So, he'll say, okay, next 5 years are digital. Similarly, India also, I'll take an analogy forward. Okay, India is also not a plain countryside. You roll across the deserts. Yeah, there is a mountain range. And it's a mountain range. Of course, there are mountains. Technology has overtaken the mountains quite a bit. But then technology is just not obliterated the Himalayas. You still have to cross it now. So it's not Russian offensive across through Belarus to Ukraine. It's not that. There is a difference of strategic geography here. Adi.
That's, the whole and soul of it that you've put across, which is the military angle of the entire thing. The way that these, especially the India-China and the China-Taiwan thing is put across as if it's pretty much a cakewalk. And somewhere down the line, I think what you've said needs to reach out to people to make them understand that militarily it's not as simple as what people are speaking.
Yeah.
So let's talk about India-China. You mentioned the Himalayas, and that brings me to my next question. It's 2 years plus. The tensions are, of course, a bit lower than what they were in 2020, if I may say that. But the deployment and the rhetoric continues. Of course, there's not much focus in terms of the, movements and this and that has been put across in the media, but the deployments and the face-to-face in certain areas is still on. 15 rounds of talks, 16th one is coming up. Wang Yi came into India. No breaks, sir. Where do you think this is heading?
So, again, it's very difficult to decipher. 2 years ago, we did not know the Chinese will come in multiple areas and target areas in Eastern Ladakh. It was not expected. They hadn't done this earlier. So what's going to happen in future is only an analysis. So having said that, look, Chinese have more interest and more anxieties on the maritime frontier. They are anxious on the maritime frontier because 80% of their oil comes across from, say, Angola or from the Middle East. And it all passes through that area. So there are serious anxieties that they have. And they are boxed in by the first silent change. Everybody knows they have a very poorest of geographies in the maritime frontier. And that's why they are venturing out and saying, South China Sea is my lake. If your intention is to expand out and become a global power, he has to break out. Chinese have to break out of the first island chain. And one of the easiest ways to take Taiwan, you are across to the Pacific Ocean. And now he's expanding to South Pacific Islands, etc. What would anybody do if he has globalist ambitions? He'll say, let me put the border to rest, territory to rest. I don't want a territorial anxiety and also maritime anxiety. And I have global ambitions. I have highest trade. The Chinese have highest trade in 126 odd nations in the world. So he and the Chinese are building up influence, large influence. So has he brought some kind of a thought process into the the border between China and India, which he's been able to execute over 2 years, and now he's not wanting to discuss further? All these are a matter of conjecturing and only analysis. What he's done in Eastern Ladakh, which was the most problematic area, is that there are kind of patrolling moratoriums created, which are being called buffer zones. So when he made buffer zones, all these skirmishes that used to take place nearly on weekly basis all along on the in the Eastern Ladakh have been put to rest, because there are now no possibilities of a clash. He pushed our troops further away. He's also not patrolling into areas he was patrolling earlier. Like he was coming to Finger 4, he's not able to come. But we were going to Finger 8, we are also not going to go there. So there is a kind of gap being created. Something, loosely we used to say no man's land. But here we call it a buffer zone. There's a buffer zone, so there is no clash. So there is a gap here. So he has made a very active border in somewhat benign form. I would say that what last 10, 12 years have shown, border was malignant in many manners, but it has become more benign in times to come. So that's one issue. Then he's got the villages coming up there, so he's rehabilitating populations. He has made a whole lot of infrastructure. And despite the fact that he's done all that, he has not moved the forces that he brought, escalating the conflict from Xinjiang South Xinjiang military division, and he has retained these forces across opposite Eastern Ladakh. So that actually implies is that the threat against India stands. He has made a border which is not so skirmish friendly as it used to be earlier, and he retained the pressure on us. So on his own, has Chinese brought the border to a position? And of course, large number of cantonments have been, small bases have been made. The number of infrastructure has come, great infrastructure has come up in heliports or in aircrafts, etc. So having said that, I would say that Chinese seem to be now more focused towards the other end, thinking that we will keep the Indian forces under pressure by retaining the forces that they brought from Xinjiang into this area, which means we keep ourselves tied down. And on their own, they will start thinking on the outward side, which is on the maritime frontiers, to have their global ambitions come through. So there is some kind of a deep thought, in my opinion, which is happening on the Indian frontier, on the Indian border areas, on the line of actual control, all along the borders, and this rehabilitation of people, the villages that he's establishing, is also part of a 2005 treaty which said that there would be populated areas will not be discussed or something. There's issue about populated areas. So what is he implying? Plus, he's got now inroads into Nepal, 5 axes being built. Eventually, he'll bring a train across to Kathmandu. So he's making inroads. Gilgit-Baltistan, he's got so much of effort going in Gilgit-Baltistan, much beyond CPEC. Prospecting very big way being carried on Gilgit-Baltistan. Myanmar, he's got road access coming from Yangon and go across to Mandalay on to Yunnan, and the one which is now going to come through from Kyakpayu to Mandalay, across to Kyakpayu to Mandalay, Ruili, and to Yunnan. So he has made axes across there. And of course, there's work on Bangladesh. Not extensive, but some work in Bangladesh. So actually speaking, I think he has working to a plan on South Asia. And that plan also includes the line of actual control, what he did in the course of last 2 years.
Just to follow up to this, militarily, do you think he Did he war game the Indian response? Because it sure doesn't look like he did so.
So, look, any prudent student of warfare knows that high altitude warfare, super high altitude warfare is not easy.
Yeah.
And it is not 1962. In 1962, in eastern Ladakh, we gave him a bloody nose. We gave the Chinese a bloody nose in Razangla and many other places. So it was not an easy warfare. But is that the warfare of tomorrow? If the Chinese mean business across the territorial frontier in Ladakh or central sector or northeast, he will not know what he's opposed with, because we are ustad, we are experts on high altitude warfare, and our troops have great resilience. So the high altitude warfare and super high altitude warfare of the passes, or because it's not ad lib, that is what we will take on. But is that the warfare? When the Americans launched the offensive in 2003 against Iraq, on first 24 hours they fired 350 missiles of all types, cruise, ballistic, everything. In the Ukraine war, the Russians, switched off the satellites of the Ukrainians, and finally Ukrainians had to literally beg Elon Musk to come and support them. Without Elon Musk Starlink terminals, there would have been no communication in Ukraine, and he came to support them. So see the kind of warfare. In the first 24 hours, the Russians fired 125 missiles, all strong weaponry, all target focused, target based, exactly to the point they wanted to hit. In 1 year, in 1 month, the Russians had fired 1,200 missiles of all types, targeting training centers, bases, ammunition centers. This has been this warfare of future is grossly different. And the Russians, in the modernity that they brought into the armed forces from 2015 onwards, brought a rocket force in, which used to be second artillery. There's a rocket force, and there are substantial missiles they've got. And they brought the strategic support force, which is largely related to cyber and space warfare, etc. Now, these are forces which report directly to the CMC. The kind of warfare of future cannot be alone left across to territorial warfare. This will transcend very many ways. So while territorial warfare we will be able to withstand and take on, we have to show resilience to accept other domains of warfare that are coming across, accept it and respond in equal measure. That is what is future of warfare.
Indeed, sir. I think the domains keep increasing, and this war especially has shown us the power of the narrative domain, which is
and that too.
In the first 1 year of the India-China clash, we saw that the Chinese were winning the narrative war within India. Today might not be so, but the first 1 year, I guess, and this is just my opinion, we did great in Balakot, but we kind of messed up the narrative war. We kind of messed up the narrative war with the Chinese as well in the first 1 year, but then we got our act together, and like a good old school chugging machine, we kind of started going forward. So, you mentioned that the Chinese are more worried in the maritime domain. How do you think they read us when we start selling weapons to Vietnam, Philippines, and we start doing? Yesterday, as a matter of fact, there was 9 countries that came in, and there were deals signed, and Malaysia. A whole lot of things are happening in that domain, especially in excuse me, especially in the Southeast Asian region. And the US, Indo-Pacific security policy talks about India being the net security provider for the region. Now, these two things, obviously, the Chinese are not going to miss out. How do you think they perceive this particular action by us?
So naturally, all these years we've been saying the Chinese have been supplying to the Pakis a whole lot of weaponry, including the nuclear. The Pakistani nuclear establishment is all thanks to some kind of stealing information that Abdul Qadir did from the West, as also for what is being supplied by the Chinese to build up the Pakistan. In fact, when they were supporting, including Al Khalid tank and you name it, it all comes from, or J-17s, it all comes from the Chinese, with the Pakistan want to throw at us. So they had relationships. We were not a large weaponry exporting nation for quite some time. That's a revised thought process that has come into us in the course of last few years, that we have now started focusing towards supply and export of weaponry, especially those which the countries, friendly foreign countries, are seeking to need. I think it's an excellent idea. And if the Chinese don't like it, so be it. I mean, it is not for us to get worried about whether Chinese like it. What the Chinese were doing with the Pakistan, we didn't like it, yeah, but we couldn't do anything about it. Let's be clear. If we have got to have relationship, and we have relationship with Philippines and relationship with Malaysians and with Vietnamese on supply of, say, BrahMos or anything else that we wish to supply, and our friends want to buy, so be it. If there's unhappiness, well, fine, yeah. You have all the right to be unhappy, but we will do what a bit. You did your bit with Pakistan. You know, it is quid pro quo. I mean, if they feel bad about it, well, so be it. Be bad. We feel bad. Yeah.
Interesting. So I think the moves are indeed in the right direction. There's no question, as you put it.
Yeah.
My last question to you, sir, and this is kind of a dangerous one, if I may. You know, 2 weeks ago, we had an incident with the Chinese and Canadian aircraft trying to take some photographs or some surveillance in North Korea. There was a close flyby or some sort of a thing that happened.
Yeah.
A similar incident happened with the Australians.
Yeah.
Many Chinese versions talk about Galwan also being an aggressive mistake by Chinese. And this is not really being spoken about quite a bit, but a lot of people have termed it as a military mistake, if I may put it that way, in the larger strategic game between India and China. Now, these three, although one turned bloody, the rest two didn't, could have landed up into major incidents which could lead into, conflict. And we know conflicts have started on these kind of incidents, these kind of small, the Gulf of Tonkin incident and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
How do you see the pressures, the military pressures on the Chinese with regards their deployment, their air incursions and their deployment in Ladakh and so on and so forth, pushed into a military mistake? And what would be the consequences, and how would we react to something like that?
So why did Galwan happen is, you go back to that crux of it. Why did Galwan happen? Chinese did make inroads. Chinese had intentions. They had never brought forces on 4 to 5, multiple points never done. In Galwan, they had not ventured into the area that they came, where the clashes taken place till date. Historically, they never come to that area. So when they came to that area, and all these expansionism the Chinese have shown is largely benign in nature. They occupy it. South China Sea, they didn't fight for it. They just occupy the islands or build some islands and say, oh, it is ours. They have gone and done the same thing. Wherever they have gone, they have not fought wars. Maybe last one was Vietnam fought, or they had some skirmish across with the Russians across there. Whichever war the Chinese have fought, they have hidden the facts of their casualties. It's historic. Whether the Americans said there are 9 lakh Chinese died in Korean War. Till date, Chinese have not said how many have died. In the long march, they said 15 million to 55 million would have died. Chinese have not said how many people would have died in the long march. Or subsequently in the Vietnam War, they have a cemetery made in Yunnan where their soldiers are buried in. It's all unkept. Nobody's bothered. There's this 113 body cemetery existing in Rudok, close to Exaichen, eastern Ladakh, where now he's saying, I will make a wall there. They have never publicized. See, there is a social contract every authoritarian regime has with his people. He has to make sure that he has to show that the CCP is invincible. And CCP's organ, PLA, is invincible. They can't show that they would have 40 casualties in Galwan and brought back. So if you ask the Chinese, was it a wise decision to have a clash and having casualties? Well, they have never shown their casualties. They hate the idea, because people will start questioning, their own people start questioning as to what the hell were you doing? What was PLA doing? Such a large force, and you have casualties. And they never take the casualties back to their homes like we do and honor our people who give the ultimate sacrifice. So the fact is that if you ask Chinese, would you like to repeat a Galwan? Well, if you repeat a Galwan, there is new rules of engagement. It is now not spike wooden rod with spikes. Here now we are prepared to fight a different methodology. So if that is so, if they like to do a Galwan again, genuine doubts. They will. They may. I mean, they should be contemplating that it was a grave mistake done by them. It had all the ingredients of escalating.
Yep.
You know, because escalation is not a guarantee. You can say escalation control and escalation dominance, very good words and very good language, but you can't actually put down on paper that this issue will not escalate. It could have escalated. It could have brought anger into troops. And if the command and control was not so vigilant, there would have been more things happening, even in Galwan and elsewhere. It did not happen. It's a saving grace. So, like rightly said, would they want a trigger of this kind to happen again? I am a grave doubts at this juncture that the Chinese want to have any trigger which leads on to any kind of warfare. With Canadians, they have fantastic relationship. You know, a historic relationship between Prime Minister Trudeau's family and Chinese. They have a historic relationship, 1 or 2 centuries old. So, you know, their grandfathers were pastors who went across to China. So, you know, there are relationships. Of course, having said that, they will make noise about all flybys and whatever it happens, what happens in Japan or what happens in the ships that they brought across in Taiwan Straits. But I think they are cautious today because of their internal turmoils, internal issues. 2021 was a year of economic instability in China.
Yeah.
That's why many of these issues have been re-signed back. Common prosperity. Now nobody talks every day common prosperity. It is put into a back burner. You know, the 10 cents and all that, they sorted things out. I think they are learning that things don't happen this way because the external money moved away. Which external money which was pumped into the Chinese economy moved away because they thought that he was trying to kind of nationalize the private industry. You know, so it was a great unstable year. 2022, President Xi in December says, this is a year of stability. He called it a year of stability because he was worried about stability. And last 4 months have not been, or 4-5 months have not been so stable also. So I'd say that all this is posturing, large posturing that takes place, but that doesn't imply that they want to overstep the bounds and do something which can be dramatic and which will cause them more pain and anguish, and they will be difficult to respond on the invincibility of CCP and invincibility of the government and invincibility of the PLA. That will come into question and people may get agitated. So that people must not know what exactly the hierarchy of the Communist Party does. That's my views.
Interesting when you put it like that. So that basically tells you till October, things are going to be pretty calm and quiet, and no major action or anything like that should happen, because that would create further instability, which I don't think the CCP wants at this moment. I take an analogy between Pakistan and China. You know, I had a debate with someone which talked about if Imran Khan comes back, then what? And here it is now, if Xi Jinping comes back, then what? Or if not?
That is an issue. Let me add one small thing.
Yeah.
See, his forces retained closer to our borders and the infrastructure had developed forces us to be prepared still, because, you know, intentions can change. And if he's got these 4 divisions sitting in Eastern Ladakh, why are they sitting there? These are not his permanent bases. He's not taking them back. So that caution on us still remains.
Indeed, sir. Let me, I'd like to really say this was an eye-opening interview for me, because we've kind of covered quite a large scope of, events within the recent past, especially in relation to China. I think China has been the center of focus, but we've gone to Ukraine, we've gone to Russia, we've gone to the East China Sea, South China Sea, come back to India, and, gone to the Himalayas again. It's been an interesting journey going through with this with you, sir. It's China has always been something of a mystery to me, and I've always wanted to learn more. And in that endeavor, I'd like to thank you for taking the time off, from this busy period of developments within our country to talk to me. Till next time, sir. Till I catch you for another episode or another subject. Jai Hind, sir.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.